everyone, I'm Leslie Cornwell, Certified Nurse Midwife with Midwifery Business Consultation. This next section has to do with employment contracts. A legal disclaimer we put at the beginning of all of our presentations. This information is for general and educational purposes only, not intended to substitute for professional, legal, or clinical advice. We strive to keep our information as accurate as possible, but make no claims, promises, or guarantees of the accuracy and completeness of the information contained. Course objectives. Students will be able to verbalize what an employment contract is. A student will be able to verbalize the different types of employment contracts. The student will be able to verbalize what is typically included in an employment contract, and the students will be able to verbalize how to create an employment contract. So why is this topic so important? As midwives and we run practices and we have our own staff, it's really important for us to understand the difference between an independent contractor, a 1099, and an employee, a W-2, because there's very different rules and regulations and protection laws in place, particularly if you're going to hire employees. Having employment contracts that protect you just as much as protects them. So it's really important, no matter if it's your receptionist, your office manager, you're adding a midwife partner, you really want to have strong employment contracts in place to have really clear expectations of the job description, the benefits included, the disciplinary process, the evaluation process, how much time each person has to give if they're going to separate working relationships. There's a lot of things, setting clear expectations of what are misunderstandings and disputes. Too many times there's breakdowns of communications. If there is no contract in place, there is no clear job description, days you're working, what you're getting paid, how you're getting paid, any benefits. Maybe one person assumed they'd get XYZ benefits. The business owner didn't think they were going to give those. You don't want to cause tension when people don't realize what is included with working at your company. And so you really want to protect you more than it is for the staff you're hiring. You want to protect your personal intellectual property rights. You want to protect that they're not going to start a practice down the street after you train them in a year. Like, there's a lot of trade secrets, property, HIPAA compliancy. There's a lot of special techniques and skills involved with midwifery practices in the medical community that you want to make sure your contracts include. So let's go to the basics. What exactly is an employment contract? It's an agreement to hire based on set terms, conditions, to have someone start. They're going to start next week. They're going to start in 90 days. There's an orientation process. They're paid X rate orientation process. Then they're paid this rate to work full time. They're paid hourly. They're paid salary. They're paid once a week. They're paid once a month. You really want to spell out the duties, the responsibilities. If you're a full-time midwife, you want to specify, is that 5 days in the office? Is that 3 days in the office? Is it on call 24/7? Is it a 3-to-1 call rotation among other midwives? You really want to clearly put anything you guys discussed in that contract to protect both parties and make sure there's clear understandings of what the role and responsibilities are, and that you both sign it and you both agree with. So there's different types of employment contracts depending on if you want short-term help, you want long-term, you want part-time, you want full-time, you want someone 1099, you want someone permanent staff on the team. There's definitely variations of what that contract would look like. A permanent contract, which is more traditional when you're hiring an office manager, a receptionist, a midwife partner, you want someone on long term to fill a need. You're not just really busy for a month or going on maternity leave for 3 months and wanting a midwife to help you out. It's a very different relationship. You're going to train them differently. You're going to be more responsible for the things that they do compared to someone that's short term. You want them to really understand the mission and value of your practice and make sure you guys are a good fit to work together long term, because your intention is it's going to be a permanent, more longer term relationship. Many practices, it's more the larger ones, smaller scale private practices have a harder time offering benefits, but you need to be clear. What can you offer? What can't you offer? Benefits can range from insurance reimbursement, malpractice, health insurance, retirement, health savings account, vacation time, short-term, long-term disability, maternity coverage. You as the business owner get to determine what the benefits are, but I'm stressing you can't discriminate. If you have a full-time staff, staff, you have to offer them the similar insurance and health and medical benefits. You can offer one person more vacation time than someone else based on their job description and what you negotiate, but you have to be very careful. If your practice offers medical benefits, retirement match program, a health savings account reimbursement, an HRA program to full-time employees, you have to make sure that if they're whatever you define as full-time employees, 40 hours a week, 35 hours a week, everybody gets offered those same amount of employment benefits. Fixed term, that has to do with more freelancer contractors. You want them to start next week. They're going to be here for 2 weeks. They're going to be here for 2 months. They're going to be here 6 months. It's used a lot of times for like locum midwife assignments. It's a fixed amount of time. Your start date and your end date. We're filling a need. You can be an employee, you can be a 1099. It just depends on what their goals are. Typically, it's an independent contractor because they're going to not get trained. They're going to fill in quickly. You expect them to have experience, expertise in what you're needing them for. They usually get paid a little bit more because they're doing their own benefits, taxes, and they're a skilled person filling in a need quickly that you have. So you want to make sure you're clearly outlining when you need the help, when they have to start, what the job description looks like, if you want it to extend, how much notice you have to give both directions, and if you want them to leave, how much notice both directions that you both agree onto. A casual employee, someone who wants more security, someone that's wanting to commit to the business and they want guaranteed working hours. So you're saying they're not fixed like a permanent person, but they're saying I want a minimum hours. You're not telling them they have to work 40 hours a week to be on your team. You're saying, okay, I want you to help part-time, minimum 20 hours a week. You can go up to 35 hours. So a casual employment contract, it ebbs and flows based on that employee has a little more autonomy involved in it. They have a little more flexibility of, okay, this week I'm going to work 20 hours a week. Next week I'm going to work 35 hours a week based on the responsibility role. And it depends. Like if you're a receptionist, depending on what days you're in the office, and if everybody's on vacation or holiday and it's a little quieter, it might make sense to have somebody that's a little more flexible. Because if you're promising them full-time employment, but you're only budgeting and you're only committing to 30, 35 hours a week, they're going to look for another job because you're not giving the hours, depending on if you're paying them hourly or salary. Obviously, if you're paying them salary, they're just thinking you're giving them a nice bonus. So you just have to really have good documents in place, what benefits are included, what the business considers holiday. Do you offer holiday pay? How many hours a week do they work? Do they get overtime after 40 hours, after 30 hours? Like, what is your practice? For employees, you legally have to, if they're salaried, that's another thing, but if they're hourly employees, you legally have to pay them time and a half after 40 hours. So most practices will be really firm. I don't want you doing overtime. If you miss a lunch, if you are getting close to 40 hours, you have to get prior approval. There's usually extra steps to help keep budgets in line because the cost of the human labor is a variable expense that can really add up fast with a midwifery practice. 0-hour contracts. This one's always interesting. I consider this more like birth assistance. It can be a contract of 1099 or a 0-hour contract. It's somebody that you're not promising any hours or set amount of time, but you're helping to fill in a need. You're helping to come as a birth assistant. You're willing to be on call 3-4 days a week, 3-4 days a month. And if there's a birth, I'll call you in and you get paid X amount per hour. You get paid a flat rate. Birth assistants will traditionally rotate among a pool and they'll get $250 to $400 for a birth as a flat rate. So they're not really included in benefits. They're not committed to certain expectations, but making sure you have a good contract with them that, hey, you're expected to be there within 30 minutes of me calling. If I call you and you don't show in 30 minutes, it's a disciplinary step. And if this happens, 3 strikes, you're out. You're no longer part of our birth assistant pool. So you want to have very clear expectations in the contract, their job description, the minimum requirements of working, the maximum, the pay it's going to be, the job description. If they don't fulfill that job description, being asked of them, what are the next steps in the process. So what is typically included in an employment contract? And this I want to talk more if they're full-time benefited position. If you're having somebody fill in part-time, independent contractor, a birth assistant here and there, These benefits typically aren't included in that, but I want you to think, because if particularly nurse midwives, they have the option to go work at a hospital, and a hospital is going to pay them $120,000 a year with benefits. So you want to be competitive, you want to budget and be fair of what you can offer someone so that they will stay around long term. They're not just going to get their experience and then go somewhere else. So the terms of the employment, when does it start? Typically, it's an ongoing relationship. You may say when it's going to start and when it'll end, if indefinitely. If you're deciding to separate ways, do you need to give 2 weeks notice? Do you need to give 2 months notice? Obviously, if there's safety issues, HIPAA violations, they lose their medical license and can't practice, you can immediately terminate without discriminating. But you have to be careful. If you are firing someone, you need to have some disciplinary documentation. They could sue you for wrongful termination if they're employed full-time and you didn't have a good reason to get rid of them. You just didn't like them, you didn't like the style. You have to be really careful because you can get sued for that. So it's really important to have good terms of employment, disciplinary steps. Things are documented, especially when they go towards the direction of a firing process. The terms talk about the job description, their responsibility, when they have to work. Are they on call for births? Are they just in the clinic? Are they supporting other practices on top of yours? Who do you collaborate with? Do you have privileges? Is it birth center? Is it home? What's the setting they're going to support? You really need to have clear expectations of their role and responsibility. Are there certain procedures you expect them to do? Is it just birth and maternity care? Is it more GYN? Is it specialty services? What is the role with your practice? Some of the benefits that can and cannot be included would be health insurance, life insurance, disability, retirement. And I just want to stress to people, many midwifery practices don't have these, but if you're going to offer them, you have to be consistent among all your full-time staff. I have a lot of midwives that'll choose to do, instead of offering health insurance, they'll say, you know what, I will give every full-time employee $200 towards their health savings account, their flex spending account, because you have a consistent budget, and then that's a nice perk. You know what you're going to pay each person and what it counts to. Or you have a match program, you put in $300, I'll put in $300 for the year for a health savings account. There's different ways you can negotiate it so that health insurance, if you hire someone older, the costs go up every year. It's kind of an unknown variable of the premiums you're going to be paying in the future. Vacation, sick time, are you going to have that paid? How many days of sick do they get before it starts going into disciplinary? Do they get 2 weeks of vacation? Do they get 6 weeks of vacation? What's the steps for approval of that? How many weekends are they obligated to, or they get off each month, especially with birth call? Is it paid? Is it unpaid sick, vacation time, FMLA? And definitely stressing the reasons and grounds for termination. Why can you fire them on the spot and you're protected? And if you are going to fire them in 30 days, because many contracts would say in 60 days, I can fire you for whatever I want. We're going to separate ways. We're protected both directions. If you're doing it in less than that time, you should have some grounds for termination. So covenants not to compete. So this one you have to be really careful, particularly in hospital settings. If a midwife is looking for a job, it's pretty common they'll see you can't work for 12 to 18 months in an X amount radius from this practice, from this organization. And those are things to think about. When you get a job as the employee side or the employer side, you need to be thinking, okay, where can I work? What are my options? This isn't just as much about the business owner putting together a contract. If you're considering working someone, you really need to understand what all these clauses and non-competes and all these extra things mean. So you really, once you sign this, it's a legal binding agreement. So if you want to start a private practice in a couple years and it has a non-compete clause, you're going to have to determine, I'm going to move away for a year, year and a half before I can come back and start my private practice if I sign this agreement and we part ways. Non-disclosure, usually can't release information about trade secrets. The clients you're taking care of, that's covered by HIPAA. You can't work for a couple other places at the same time. They want you just strictly working for them. And then as a business owner, you can understand that thought process. If you commit to orientating and training them for 6 months to a year, and then they just start their own private practice down the street, you've now just trained your competition, and it does get it hard. Or vice versa, if you're helping them get going, and now they're teaching everything. They're using all your documents, your tools, your templates, and sharing it with all the midwives in the community because they're trying to get favors. You want to protect how hard you've worked to start your business. Ownership agreement, what materials are intellectual property by the company that they can use, but they don't have rights to take after they leave. They don't have rights to publicly advertise and make financial gains from. So that you want to be real clear expectations, not just fun part of catching the babies, when you start, when you stop, when I want you to work, what is the job description. Assignment, meaning we want you to refer people within our organization. If we have multiple services, we want that kept within and that's more of a hospital system. They have massive organizations. They don't want you to referring to your friend that has an alternative therapy clinic down the street. They want you to refer to their own specialist within their organization, and that'll be typically written. Different ways to resolve conflicts, disputes, arbitrations, mediations. There's different neutral parties to help solve problems is typically written in a contract. So how do you exactly create a contract? We have a lot of awesome tools and templates with Midwifery Business Consultation that you can use to get started. Every state is different, every situation is different, so I strongly encourage people to have a lawyer look at any agreement, an agreement with staff, an agreement with a collaborating physician, an agreement with a client, any legal binding document you're going to sign. It's a good idea to have a lawyer look at it because the language to us doesn't always mean what it means in the legal world. And you'd be surprised how many midwives wish they'd have spent the little bit of extra couple $100 to have a lawyer look at something versus now they're cornered both directions with being the business owner or being the employee that the contract is binding and they didn't realize exactly what they were signing. So you want to make sure when you're doing an employment contract, you're putting the date that it's enacting, the date that it starts. Is it indefinite? Is it a short-term contract? They've agreed to review the policies, the procedures, to follow the regulations of the organization, the state. They're keeping their licensure up. They're keeping their continuous education, their certifications. Are you paying for their continuing ed certifications? The hospitals typically offer $1,500 to $2,000 a year in continuing education, and you need your license to practice as a midwife or a nurse, so a lot of times the contracts will reimburse for that to be covered. So you just want to really be clear of the role, the responsibility, the terms of what they're going to be doing. They're going to do 2 days in the office, they're going to do 4 days in the office, they have 1 admin day, they're going to be willing to volunteer, they're going to do projects on the side, they're going to go to conferences, help promote the organization, they're going to just work in the clinic. Like, what do you want them to do for your organization? A compensation package is typically a letter you give before the official contract summarizing, and it's not so much with admin staff, it's more with healthcare providers joining your team. Really, maybe you're giving them a bonus, a moving or relocation if they stay on for 2 years, and that comes as soon as they start or after they've been there 6 months. Like, you can make the terms whatever you want for your contract as a business owner. When you are considering taking a job, you don't typically have as much wiggle room. Big hospital organizations are pretty firm. This is what we offer NPs, this is what we offer CNMs, this is what we offer RNs, take it or leave it. With a private practice, you can tend to be more creative in your employment contracts. Just always think win-win situation. If you want something, if you want to get paid something more, you have to be willing to take something off the table that you're not so interested. Maybe you don't care about the insurance, the health insurance, because your partner has the benefits and that's not a needed expense for you. So you could negotiate and say, hey, I want an extra $5,000 a year. I'm not going to take health insurance. I am showing you I'm waiving. We have our own insurance plan. That'll be a savings for you. So you always have to think in win-win situations when you're negotiating as the business owner and as the person potentially taking an employment contract. What are the vacation time? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 6 weeks? Is it paid? Is it unpaid? How much time do you get? What if there's a family emergency? Sick time, FMLA, you really have to have it clearly written either in the contract or it's referring to an addendum or a policy you have with your human resource department. So the employee benefits, you just want to make sure everybody clearly understands. Even if you say medical compensation, is it dental, is it eye, is it health? What is it exactly including? And is there a probationary period? It's very common the first 3 months to have a probationary period of a longer term provider relationship. It's not as much with receptionists, birth assistants, and office managers, but it can be there. So typically you'll say the first 2 to 3 months, we're going to evaluate if this is a good long-term relationship. They've gotten past orientation, they've trained, we've gotten to know each other really well, and that helps give you an exit clause as a business owner that, yep, they're not a good fit. We're not going to keep them on the team. We're at that probationary period. We're going to separate ways. Performance reviews, typically they're done annually. Typically there's a raise in the process to help with inflation, to help compensate for the additional skills and value that they're bringing to the company. You don't have to put in writing exactly what you're going to pay them as the raise. You just have to say we're going to do performance reviews annually and you'll be compensated accordingly to our organizational policies, the evaluation, the budget that we have projected for the next year, etc. It's really putting a framework of expectations. These are you following our mission? We've got some testimonials from clients. Are they good? Are they not good? We've got feedback from colleagues that are anonymous of how working with you is like. Are you on time? Are you missing work? Are you performing? Are you always behind in the office? Are you doing a great job being very thorough with following up on your labs and taking care of clients and triaging things appropriately? That's the whole point of a performance review, because you want them to grow and continue expanding and challenging their skills, but you also want them to be safe for the organization. So termination is not the fun part, but you have to think anytime you're starting a relationship, whether you're business partners, you're hiring somebody, you always have to think eventually we're going to separate from each other. And what does that relationship look like? Typically, you want to give 60 to 90 days notice as a healthcare provider, as a midwife, because your delivery list is planned 9 months in advance. They have to find someone else. They have to get someone with a state license. If you're accepting insurance, they have to get them credentialed. They have to get somebody else trained. It's a courtesy in the health provider world to give 60 to 90 days notice. If you're doing it with office managers, birth assistants, receptionists, it tends to be more 2 to 3 weeks because you can turn over that staff's responsibility and training a lot faster. Non-compete clauses, I see them very, very often on both directions from the business owners and from employees thinking about working at a different company. And so just really understanding what is included in the non-compete clause. Maybe you can't work as a midwife, but you can do another position in the area until that time is over if you want to start your own private practice. Some states you can enforce the non-compete clauses and some states you can't. So you just have to know your local area and have a conversation with your lawyer to make sure you clearly understand the terms of the agreement. So just as an overall conclusion summary, employment contract is an agreement between an employer and an employee regarding the employee's terms of the relationship, what their job description is, when they start, when they end, what are the benefits. It clearly lays out the terms of the contract and what you both agree to. Breakdowns of communication are the hardest things. Once you sign it, you don't have any negotiating room both directions. And there could be a lot of legal ramifications from the contract being violated by either party. So one of the biggest advantages you can get when using an employee contract is to get great staff, give them great benefits, give them great performance evaluations, and really have clear expectations, their job, their role, their responsibility, and what they're getting in exchange for their time and skills to bring to the organization. You can add and subtract any terms to your employment contract you want. You just have to be careful. If you're offering medical insurance benefits to full-time employees, you can't discriminate. If your full-time employee status is 35 hours, anybody that comes onto your team that's 35 hours or more has to be offered certain benefits. So you just have to be careful in understanding what can I negotiate and individualize per person, what has to be across the board for full-time employees, and that's something you can get customized in your area. So contracts are a two-way street. It's an obligation for the business owner to fulfill paying for time, and it's a contract for the employee to do the job that they've agreed to get compensated. And so once it's signed, it's very difficult to renegotiate the employment contract unless someone is thinking about leaving and then all of a sudden the business owner really wants them to stay. You might in those rare situations, but typically it's during performance evaluations you get your raise based on your knowledge and skills brought to the table. No matter what the terms are for the employment, it's always important to read any contract carefully, ask lots of questions. Don't ever sign something you're not comfortable with, you don't understand, on both directions, because these are legal binding documents, and people, I hear it over and over and over again, do not realize some of these terms, these legal jargons. They think it means one thing, but in the legal world, it means something completely different than they did.